Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast, where each week we speak with brands, icons, innovators, and trailblazers within the fly fishing industry, exploring both the successes and failures they've encountered along the way to become who they are today. But first, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast or joined our email list, please do so by going to the flyfisherinsiderpodcast.com, or you can also find us on Instagram at flyfisherinsiderpodcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. This is Greg. I'm your host here, and it's we have Brian Silvey for Steelhead Month in the middle of October. So I brought Brian onto our other show, The Guided, sponsored by Scientific Anglers show, on episode 8. And Brian is he talked about Skagit lines and developing those lines and whatnot. So I'll make sure that I put that link in the show notes for you to go listen to Brian's biography and what he is in episode 8. But here today to tell us more about Steelhead and 5 overlooked tips and improvements and whatnot is Brian. Brian, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, no worries. It's awesome that you're back, especially for Steelhead Month here. I'm sure fish are moving into the system for you guys out where you are. And yeah, so, you know, like I mentioned in the audience or in the intro there, sorry, you know, people can go back and learn a bit more about you in episode 8 on The Guided. But here now, tell us a little brief intro about yourself, plus we'll jump right into the content.
Yeah, sure. I live in Oregon. I guide on the Deschutes and the Sandy River, which are a winter fishery on the Sandy River and more of a summer-fall fishery on the Deschutes. And basically grew up around here fishing for steelhead. You know, kind of the background real quick is as a kid started as a commercial fly tyer and kind of worked my way into guiding kind of in the early 80s. So that's kind of it. Been working ever since trying to get people into steelhead.
And you are doing that. You are getting people into steelhead, and you are here today to tell us some tips to get people into steelhead now, some new listeners as well. So let's jump right into that. Brian, where would someone begin for steelheading? Let's take it to that level, and then we'll build up on that.
Well, if somebody's brand new to steelheading, never even thought about trying it, I mean, I would recommend, like, if you have a friend to help you, that's great, you know, to show you kind of the ropes or give you the idea, or a class, you know, your local fly shop or somebody to give you a class, because it's a lot different than trout fishing. And so, you know, a guided trip is also good, but sometimes it can be a little wasted if you have no experience at all. I mean, a guide is great for doing that, but a lot of times it would help if you had a little knowledge of how to steelhead fish, or at least the basic knowledge, and then the guide can work off of that to build and help you get farther along a lot quicker too. So, you know, a class makes a huge difference. There's a lot of videos on how to do it, but sometimes you got to get out there and like go through the repetition a little bit to learn, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. A class is, you know, you're going to get more out of it than, you know, a 16-minute YouTube video or something like that. However, that not knocking a 16-minute YouTube video, because there is useful content in that as well. So Brian, what are like some key areas, or like I mentioned in the beginning, 5 key areas that guys should focus on?
Well, like the ones I see a lot, and I kind of made little notes on some things that sometimes I see, and I don't know if they're big problems, but just these are some things I see sometimes as I'm guiding people. And the first one I was always thinking of is some people that are basically with the spay rod nowadays, we can cast a lot farther, and sometimes we're overfishing the water. So say I put a guy in a small riffle, basically, or just a small little spot, and, you know, I tell him, hey, keep it short, you know, fish this little run. I'm going to go down with the other guy or whatever. And sometimes I always come back and they're always throwing like, it's a 30-foot, 40-foot cast, and they're throwing 60 to 70 feet. And so sometimes we're overfishing the spots, and so he's way past the heavy water. Instead of just throwing to the edge of the heavy water and let it swing into the softer water, he's throwing out into the rapids, basically, and swinging in, which to me is just wasted fishing sometimes. And, just overfishing the water can be an issue. And it sounds funny now with back in the day with the single-hand rod, it never felt like you could overfish it. But with these two-handed rods, everybody gets used to a certain distance to cast. And whatever that distance is, sometimes it's hard for a person to fish a short line, maybe just the head, or just shooting just a little bit of line. They're used to doing those 5 or 8 pulls out with their shooting line, and that's just what they fish everywhere they go. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to fish water to what it tells you to fish, basically. Like, that one can be a hard one because guys will just do their normal thing and, 8 pulls out, boom, they're swinging, and which is, it's fine, but I think that's a lot of wasted time. So, you're out past the fish. So
on a percentage ratio, like, are you fishing that shorter, like you mentioned, like the head plus maybe 1 or 2 pulls out? Like, are you fishing that, like, 100% of the time, 40% of the time? Like, what ratio would you be fishing that style of water?
Well, usually the best way to think of it is a lot of times the head end of a run.
Yeah.
Is not your, 80-foot cast, 70-foot cast. A lot of times that's your short one. And sometimes in a run, you might start out with a short cast, and as you go down the run, it's going to open up. The current's going to slow down and widen out a little bit. So, like, a lot of guys will start with that long cast just because they see down below they're going to need it. I would start out with that short cast, and then as I work my way down, going, oh, well, now it's opening up a little more. I might need to lengthen my cast out a little bit. So I would stand, I wouldn't step down. I would just work out a little more line, couple strips, throw it again, couple strips, throw it again. And then once I hit my distance where I'm like, okay, now I'm out there far enough, then I would work my way, finish working my way down the run. It's just that guys get used to just throwing that long cast, looking down the run because you can see the whole thing going, okay, I'm going to need this distance all the way through. And I think sometimes you're just wasting it on that, upper part of it. And I say that, and a lot of times I'll have people start with a short cast, maybe the leader, especially in the summer or fall, and then we'll lengthen it out. But what'll happen is they just keep lengthening it out until they get like that, 60, 70 foot cast in a spot that maybe needs 20, 30 feet. So, that's just something I see sometimes where there's little buckets guys are fishing or little runs, not always the bigger stuff, but we'll all come back and I'm like, oh, you're fishing the other side of the river.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll tell him, if you want to fish over there, I can row you over there. It's like, because you're trying to fish over there. I'm like, they're not over there. They're on the inside of this heavy current.
That's funny. So, that's funny.
That's my little joke to him.
Well, it makes sense. And, I'll admit publicly here, I'm guilty of that every now and then. You just can't,
well, we all are.
We just want to get that cast out. That perfect long. You know what I mean? Long loaded cast out. Even though it's like, there's fish right in front of you. And like you said, you just need the leader, and that's why we're there, is to fish, not to cast. I mean, yeah, I totally agree. So I am guilty of that, for sure. So.
I've done it myself. Or I'm throwing it too far.
Yeah, exactly. So, what else do you have for us, Brian? So that's definitely a good tip. That's you know what I mean, a good refresher for this season for guys getting into fish.
Yeah, Think short. So the other one would be casting angles. Which angle do I cast? This long cast or short cast, whatever we're doing, to try to get the fly to swing properly. And so, like for me in the summer, warmer water temperatures. I'm usually going to do a single stay, maybe a snap tee with my stay rod. Or if I'm using a single-handed rod, I'm quartering down, about 45 to get my fly to get under tension right away. I feel like, in the summer, or like I said, in the fall, the water temperature's warmer, so they're going to be a lot more aggressive fish. They're going to move to the fly a lot more easily, or, whatever you want to call it, more aggressively. So I want my angle where my fly comes under tension right away, so it's tracking better. From whatever long distance I'm throwing, my fly is going to be tracking. I have tension on it the whole time, and so that quarter down, like I said, either snap T or single stay, or are my definite angle I want to throw. Now the opposite of that, and maybe in the winter or the colder conditions, maybe November, December, if you're still fishing some of those summer runner fall fish, you want maybe a slower swing. So your casting angle might be more across, and then you're going to try to get the fly down or slow it down a little more before it comes under tension. So casting angles, that one's always a tough one. And then depending on what you have behind you on some of your angle, because sometimes you end up throwing it past the 45 because you got trees or bushes behind you. So it's, people always struggle with that. And sometimes they'll do like, say they have a tree behind them and they'll do a double stay and then they'll bend it once and just let it go. And so that's not really the best angle because you're going to get a big curve in your line. And so angles are important for either fly speed, fly tension. You got to kind of think that out sometimes as you're fishing your way down. What angle do I want to really throw that? And most people get locked into that snap T. Mm-hmm. That's just like what we use a lot because we get a lot of upstream wind on the Deschutes River. So that's a great cast and great angle to fish, but you still have to think of those to keep tension on the fly and keep your fly swinging properly all the way through.
So what about the single hand guys that are sitting there going, okay, well, I don't double hand. So single hand guys, they got the trees behind them, stuff like that. Like, how are they adjusting themselves to efficiently?
Right. Well, back in the day, I guided lots of people with single-handed rods before we used stay rods. And we would basically, if we had brush or trees behind you, you're going to do a roll cast. Mm-hmm. And you can do a single-handed rod where you're almost doing a single stay. You're getting your fly above you and quartering out. Now, you don't have the ability to move as much line as you do with a two-handed fly rod. But so you're going to have to mend typically a little more, I always think, with a single-handed rod is you're going to throw it out at your angle, which quarter down, you'll mend right away. And then sometimes you're going to have to probably mend again just because you don't have that same length of rod to lift your line and kind of set it up at an angle, with that longer rod. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you're ending up doing a couple smaller mends, to kind of clean that up. But, single-handed rod, it only becomes a problem when you start getting out like 60, 70 feet, which if you have trees and bushes behind you, you're probably not going to hit that distance anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're going to be keeping it short, so, it's going to be more manageable. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that, Brian. I think that's definitely good knowledge for sure. So, and when you're casting, like you're going upstream 45 is what you're saying, and then just letting it drift.
No, quartering downriver. Quartering downriver.
Quartering down.
So you're going downriver at about a 45-degree angle. That way you can mend it right away, and then you have tension on your fly from that farthest distance out, swinging all the way in. If you go upstream or quartering straight across, if you're going across the current, the current's going to affect it more.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the more mending you're going to have to do. And that was my next thing was mending. Because that's always an interesting one too.
Which we'll jump into.
How much mending do you do?
We'll jump into it in a sec, but I know, like you mentioned, like a lot of guys go upstream. I don't know where this came from. Then I mean, this is where I've always read, personally, this is where I've always been taught as well, is upstream quarter or swing it down. Do you know what I mean? Like mend, all that sort of stuff. And so you're kind of debunking that by saying downstream quarter and in, correct?
Well, I'm not debunking it. It's just water temperature, what you're trying to do with your fly.
Okay.
So like on the Deschutes, for us, we're usually fishing early morning, late evening with floating lines.
Yeah.
So our fly is just a little wet fly. So we're trying to get that fly to swing a certain speed from whatever distance we're throwing right away at that slow, very consistent, swing, or, whatever consistent swing you want. You could broadside it, you could swing it a slow swing across, and you want it, whatever it is, you want the swing to be consistently the same all the way through.
Of course. Yeah.
So if you throw it up, you're you're losing tension on your fly with a floating line that we're trying to do. And, it's not going to swing that radius very well. But if you want to get your fly down, like if you're fishing a floating line with a weighted fly and you want to get it down more, you throw it upstream, and then you'd have to mend or stack mend quite a bit to try to get it down into a deeper slot. That works great too, but it's almost not really swinging as much until right at the end. I mean, you're trying to get more depth on it to only swing that last little bit. So there's multiple ways to do this. This is the thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. No, definitely cool. I you know what? I'm going into the Skeena here in a few weeks, and I just can't wait to try that. I think it's a different approach, and I'll definitely keep you in mind on that one. So now you mentioned mending.
Well, that's very traditional. That's all it is. That's just super traditional wet fly swing is what that really is. So
I like it. No, for sure. Mending. I mean, the most common thing that you see, and I see guys struggle with, is mending or not knowing when to mend, or the line just not having a proper mend. So walk us through that. Walk us through some tips on
right.
mending.
So after we hit those angles of cast, then when do you mend? That's the other one. And so if you are casting that quartered cast, you can mend a lot of times right away because you can put that slack right behind your fly and keep it all in line with your rod. If you hold your rod in an upward angle and then slowly come in behind it, a lot of times you'll keep that line straight and then not have a big curve in it. Now, I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but I think the more you can keep that consistent, predatory grabbing kind of thing, where that just drives them crazy, where it's going the same speed. That kind of triggers that bite with steelhead sometimes. So, mending is important, and sometimes we overdo it too, though, because guys will throw it, mend it, and then maybe they'll mend it again, and now we got a bunch of slack on our fly, and now it's not really tracking very well. Mm-hmm. So, and every run's different, and every spot's different. So sometimes I'll have clients where I'm like, standing there with them, and they'll do their normal throw it out, got the good angle on it. They'll throw them in, but there's maybe a current or a rock or some kind of boil that puts a curve in it right away. And I'm like, oh, you got to mix it again. And they're like, oh, I'm so used to just doing that one. And it's like, well, every spot's different. Once you get past that rock, you might be able to fish it with just one mend. So you kind of have to watch your line to see. And a lot of times I'll throw it with my angle I want to throw. I'll do my mend, and then I kind of see what it does. And then sometimes I'll go, oh, that looked a little fast, or I didn't like how that swung. I'm going to fix that. And so the second mend usually I'll do is after I'll throw it out, I'll do my big mend or my big setup, whatever that is. And then there's always the little fixes. And I don't want to move the fly anymore. I just want to keep that line so it's staying that same speed and we're not getting that big tail whip at the end. If you know what I mean, where it's all of a sudden got part of your line swinging good. You can see part of your line is like curved broadside across and it's ripping through. But I'm not saying that won't work. It's just kind of inconsistent. I wanted that consistency. So that's what I'm watching for. And as I go, in some runs, like I said, you might not have to mend much at all. In other runs, you might have to do a couple different little fixes to it as it's going, because it might be going too fast. Mm-hmm. So.
Oh, awesome.
It's all that fly speed. So trying to get that right fly speed, and that one can be debated too sometimes.
and I mean, what is that? Just practice, you figure? I mean, just more casting, more practice. I know.
Not so much practice, but just having more knowledge of runs and where you might want to slow it down or you might want to maybe speed it up. In the head end of a run, a lot of times I'll tell people that you're going to have to mend more in that faster, heavier water at the very top of a run, just because all the different currents, rocks, or whatever's in there. By the time you might get to the middle of the run, you might still be mending once and then maybe one little fix. And then by the time you get to a tail out, if you throw the right angle, you might not have to mend at all, because it might be the same consistent current all the way through, or it might not be much mending at all, if any. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the difference between the top, the middle, and the bottom of a run. If you have a big enough run, it's going to change throughout it. So you might have to change your tactics on your mending throughout the whole run.
Yeah, I definitely think that little analogy that you just pointed out with the head, the tail, in the middle there, is going to help out a lot of people for sure. Because it's simplified, right? And that's, it broke it
Right,
down,
yeah. I
you
mean,
know.
exactly. You want
So
to keep this simple. It's not, I mean, people make it really complicated.
don't like it. It totally is. I mean, there's a lot of people that are, either gun shy of it or, they've never done it and they're intimidated and whatnot when it shouldn't be. I mean, it is fun. Once you get hooked up, it's,
Right. No, it's
I
supposed
mean,
to be
like,
fun.
it's
So that's,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
hold on. So definitely. So Brian, what else do you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah.
What's another tip that or improvement that people should look upon here?
Here's one that's always debatable, and there's a lot of different ideas on this one. And is set the hook or not set the hook when a steelhead grabs your fly, or holding a loop or not holding a loop. So I'll explain that. Is that when you're swinging your fly and a steelhead grabs, the idea is for them to grab your fly when you want to wait till they turn down river if that's how they're taking it. You never know how they're grabbing it, but you need to wait for them to grab your fly and turn away from you, or at least turn on the fly. If you pull a little early, which I've seen lots of times, and sometimes just a little lift will do it because you have so much tension on your fly that you lift your rod just a little or twitch or jerk or whatever that you just pulled the fly right out of their mouth. So to me, it's like the analogy of watching a fish come up your dry fly and you're a little early, on the lift before he comes down on it, on a
Hmm.
trout, you just pull it right out of their mouth. Well, it's the same thing, and almost more so with a tight line, is that as soon as you feel anything, you lift, it just pull right out of their mouth. So one way that you can fix that is to hold a loop. Now, the problem with the loop is you have to be able to let go of this loop in your hand before you lift or do anything. So I have people hold it not to the cork. I'll have them hold it just in their fingers, just real lightly in their fingers, like you were going to strip,
Hmm.
like a slow strip in or something. You would just hold like a 6 to 8 inches of a loop in your fingers, and that's just a delay to let them turn on your fly. So some people hold a loop, some people don't. If you cannot let go of this loop, then this is not for you. Like if you're a lot of people like will just latch down on that thing as soon as some fish grabs. You think giving him slack is not what you want to do, but we need time for the fish to turn. And if you do lift your rod, especially a spey rod. Now, a single-handed rod used to be you just lift straight up, just like you would anything to get tension on a fish. With the two-handed fly rods, since they're so much longer, you do that straight up hook set. That it doesn't work because it's such a long rod that it just doesn't. You can't get tension on them a lot of times. So to the bank is what I always tell people. Like lift low to the bank. Once you feel the weight of the fish is running, or they definitely have the fly now. You'll lift low and towards the bank to kind of just get that initial tension on them. And then a lot of times, once they're really on there, then I'll lift my rod tip up, kind of see what they're going to do next, kind of be ready for whatever comes after that. So, yeah, that one's setting the hook or not setting the hook. There's a lot of different ideas. I've talked to a lot of different people about that one, and some people are a big belief as soon as they feel that weight, they let them have it, give them the wood,
Yeah, yeah.
hit them hard, And I've done that, and I've still missed them, pulled it right out of their mouth. It felt like. So there's a lot of different ideas. You can go round and round on this one, but I like the idea of letting them grab the fly, wait till you feel the weight of the fish, and then lifting towards the bank. Take him to the bank, I always
Mhm.
say to people. So.
Yeah, I've actually never heard that. I mean, I've heard of people, strip setting or like some people trout set. Some people the flies, the steelhead just hammer it and they set themselves instantly. Like so, this is definitely something again to try out and a different tactic because I have lost a lot of fish. Just you know what I mean on setting myself personally, and it makes for a
Right,
frustrating.
and nothing's the thing. The thing of it is, nothing's perfect. I mean, I've
No.
done it where I gave him the loop. I feel the fish. I'm like, oh, there he is. Look, oh no, he's not. And then I've actually stripped out more line and have him take another loop. And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. and you're like, nothing. And you're like, how can that happen? So nothing's perfect.
It is frustrating too, and
So,
it makes for a long day when it's like, yeah, we got a couple hits. That's it. So
right. Well, and steelheading, a couple grabs is better than nothing.
oh, that's
that's
a good day
when
for
you
a
do
long
it enough,
drive.
you're like, well,
Yeah.
right. I had a grab. At least I had somebody interested.
Yeah,
So.
a good day for a long drive. That's what we call that. So it's funny.
Right.
But yeah, no, for sure. So, and what else do you have for us, Brian? Another useful tidbit here.
Well, the other one would be, fly choice, I guess. And, like that can always be a hard one with people, and you're new to it, is what fly to use. And, if you don't really know what to use, local fly shop's always helpful to kind of give you what's been working or what tactic's been working, like, do you need a weighted fly, or do I need just a small wet fly, or, what am I using during the day, kind of a thing, just like you would for trout, for hatches and stuff like that. The problem is trying to get confidence in the fly that you're using or what you're doing. It always comes down to, like, guys will go, well, I just don't like this one. I haven't had any luck. And it's like, well, maybe we just haven't seen it steelhead yet or ran into one. But if you lose that confidence, then, you can put on a different fly. But to build confidence in what you're using can be hard because you're not getting that response like you do for trout, where you put on a overcast caddis, you throw it underneath a little shady tree, and the trout comes up and eats it. You're like, oh, this fly's working.
Yeah.
It's a little more simplified. Where steelheading, it could be all day, and then so you kind of going through your head, what am I doing wrong? Maybe it's the wrong fly. Maybe you're losing that confidence, and and that can be hard. With all these different flies that are tied on what to use. So like for the summer, for us, we're using little wet flies, like I said, traditional wet flies like skunks or greenbed skunks, or there's multiple different ones, and use them what color and stuff like that. And sometimes you just got to stick with it and not worry about the fly. Just keep covering that water and hitting your angles and trying to get that fly speed sometimes is more important. And then, like in the later fall or spring or winter, then sometimes the fly is a little bit different in the sense of weighted flies, or trying to get the fly down with a bigger profile and things like that. And so sometimes, maybe the river's got color and you want to fish a brighter fly, or the river's pretty low and clear. Maybe you want to fish a smaller, darker fly. So the fly choice thing always comes into play on what to use and, how to get my fly down. And then the other thing is, if you're getting hung up so much when you're doing that in the winter or spring or whatever, I don't like that either. If this fly's so heavy, you're just banging bottom and getting hung up constantly and trying to get your fly done. I don't think that's good for swinging or trying to fish a run down through. I think you're kind of probably blowing it too much by having the fly. So I would put a lighter fly on to make sure it's swung all the way in without that getting snagged constantly, and that's just not fun either. So the fly choice thing's always another one that goes around and around, because people have different ideas on what you should be using, and sometimes you need to take somebody else's knowledge or confidence and go, okay, this is what this guy told me this is the fly that works, and
okay,
I'm going to stick with this.
Let's take your knowledge on right now you're guiding right now. What is what's on the Deschutes? What is on your rods? What are you putting? What are the clients, the fly that's tied up right now on your rods? What do you got on?
Well, lately, like I said, in the mornings we're fishing a floating line. So on floating lines, I like, a traditional wet fly. Lately, I've been fishing one that's called a tranquilizer. It's a Marty Sherman old fly. A lot of ours are really old traditional patterns. Sometimes Atlantic salmon, patterns also work. Or a muddler minnow has been my other good one here lately. A little number 6 traditional muddler minnow is always a good one this time of year. And then in the the muddler minnow is just a traditional muddler, so it's got a gold hair. Body.
Okay.
And it's spun deer head, and has a turkey wing. There's very subdued kind of pattern, but it pushes a lot of water and makes a lot of disturbance in that, sometimes in that faster water. And so The other pattern is usually like purple, is a great color. That tranquilizer is kind of purple and claret, so it's kind of a little more subdued pattern. But, purple and pink's a really good color combo in a smaller, traditional fly. Deck Hogan has one called a no-name fly that's kind of a purple and pink fly that's in a lot of books. John Shuey has another one called Rick's Revenge that's purple and pink. Sometimes you're just trying to find the colors that not everybody else is fishing. You might, sometimes I'll fish a run this time of year with a bright fly and then maybe have another client fishing a dark fly. So that's how you can split it up with your friend is like, all right, well, I'm going to go bright. Why don't you go dark or more subtle? And we'll fish these runs and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So you kind of at least both have something different on. And then during the day, I'm fishing like maybe a little marabou or a little leech, something that's going to sink a little bit or has more movement. But we're not fishing heavy sink tips. We're just fishing light sink tips just to get it down a little.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought we lost you there. Edit. Okay. So you're fishing. So when you're doing this with the fly and you have them going, so what is there specifically you mentioned earlier, skunk butts in the spring and then bigger meaty stuff in the fall? Like, again, how does one distinguish what's what between that? I mean, there's a big difference between a skunk butt and a big streamer or something like that. Like where would one look at, particularly since it is October and it is fall, so like for steelhead or moving in and stuff like that, what's a good selection of say 5 flies that someone should, without a doubt, have in their box? If they're going to buy 5 flies this season to start off with, what should they do for the fall?
Okay, well, it all comes down to water temperature, and the easiest way is just, if the air temperature is getting down in the low 40s or something, or it's getting cold, or you're getting some frost in the morning, and maybe it's warming up a little bit to 45, 50 degrees, well, the water is going to be quite a bit colder, and you're probably going to need something to get down a little more, at least in my neck of the woods. Now, in other areas in British Columbia, the guys will fish skaters at, 35 to 38 degree water and get them, on the surface. But in our fisheries, if it gets down in the, mid 40s, you're going to need like a leech or something fishing that slower, softer water. So like, to me, my box will have, multiple of, say, 4 or 5 flies, but they're going to be different sizes and going to fish different depths is kind of the way I would think of it. Or fishing different water qualities. So like I'll have a purple and pink fly, which those little, like it's a 6 or a 4, a very traditional wet fly, white wing fly. And then I'll have probably maybe a muddler minnow, like I said, because that's still one of my favorites. You can tie that and have that in a couple different colors too. But then I would have some small little marabous that are pretty, smaller silhouette. It's all size of flies kind of. And then maybe I would have a bigger leech or a bigger marabou that would be more of a fly that's maybe 2.5 inches long or maybe even 3 inches long. And then I might even have some for later in the fall or more closer to early winter stuff that will be quite a bit bigger. It might be a 4-inch fly, and it's going to have maybe a larger eyes or it's going to sink a little more. That's kind of the way you're thinking is the depth. So you're going to have something just below the surface, something down a couple feet, or a first few inches maybe. And then you're going to have one that's down 3-4 foot. And then, you might have one that you're trying to get down closer to that, 4 to 6 foot depth maybe even. So that's the way I think of it is water temperature. What level am I going to fish this fly? On the Deschutes, we fish flies, early, in the morning, we'll fish wet flies just below the surface. But once the sun comes out, then we're fishing more sink tips or something to get it down a little bit so the fish aren't looking up into the sun is the reason we do that. But in the winter, we're not fishing floating lines or, any of that kind of stuff. We're just fishing sink tips. We're fishing different weighted sink tips with different weighted flies. So we're not getting hung up too much or we're trying to fish certain depths. So, it can be complicated, but I always think of water temperature to where the fish are related to where they're going to be or how active they're going to be. So I think that's a simplified way is if the water's colder, typically you're going to have to fish sink tips and something to get down. Mm-hmm. It's not always colder, but just more colored water, things like that. And where you have clearer conditions, sometimes they can be a little spookier. The water's a little warmer. The more traditional kind of techniques work better. Classic kind of stuff that are smaller flies, smaller profile will be a better option. So,
wow. Yep. Absolutely.
I don't know if that helps simplify it any because you can go round and round on that one too.
I think we covered a heck of a lot in simplification and making things easier. And again, like, you're a wealth of knowledge, Brian. That's for sure. I love it. I always love talking to you about steelhead here, man. I always learn stuff. So, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. So, you are guiding. You're good to go. You guys are operational for this season. Where are you going to be guiding from again?
I'm guiding on the Deschutes all fall. So I guide. We start steelheading on the Deschutes usually in early August. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting to about kind of the mid-season here, getting ready to start where we'll be camp. I do a lot of camp trips. So I'm camping on the Deschutes. We'll do 3-4 day camp trips and just camp and move down the river and fish. And it's a great time of year to be out camping because usually the weather is nice and, a little cooler nights, and it could be a fun time to hang out on a river fishing for steelhead.
Oh, I bet. I wish they would open the borders. I'd be down there in a second. So,
hey, yeah.
And vice versa.
Hopefully we get through this COVID thing.
Yeah. Well, I think we will. I know we will. We'll pull together. We definitely will. But until then, I mean, it's unfortunate, right? So. For sure. And you guys I know you're with Winston still in SA and whatnot, so you're loving that. Any new stuff with those guys that you guys have coming out or that you're using?
No, I mean, a lot of this with COVID and the shutdowns, a lot of things have been put on the back burner a little bit, but there'll be some new stuff from Winston that'll come out. Probably next year. Same thing with Scientific Angler. I mean, we're going to come out with this new Skagit head here in September. It should be out. There'll be a floating Skagit and traditional kind of floating Skagit, and then there'll be a Skagit intermediate, which will be a little better for those colder conditions. And then there'll be some new lines from them too. We're always tinkering with things and working, working on stuff. So. That's part of the fun of working with those companies is, it's kind of having ideas and working through those ideas and kind of see it come into a line. And so it's always a team effort on different ideas, but that's kind of the fun part.
Awesome. So Brian, if someone wanted to reach out to you, learn more about what we talked about, had any questions or clarity, that where could they find you at? Where could they reach you guys at? And I know you are busy.
Well, I have a website. Yeah, the website is silveysflyfishing.com. Instagram's another great one. It's under just Brian Silvey, but it's Brian Silvey's Fly Fishing Guide Service. You can find me on any of that. Because a lot of people message me on Instagram, and that's always an easy one to kind of just message somebody back when they have a specific question or need an answer to something or just lost on what they're trying to do.
Perfect. Perfect. I'll definitely make sure I put all that in the show notes. So once again, Brian, thank you so much, man. You always cover like my head is spinning from knowledge. So I'm sure listeners are as well. So I want to thank you and I want to thank the listeners as well.
Oh, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, no worries. Anytime, buddy. Anytime.